Well, you're watching Morning Live. Thanks so much for being with us. Police Commissioner Khehla Sitole marked his last day in office after reaching an agreement of mutual termination of contract with President Cyril Ramaphosa. Sitole has been at loggerheads with the police minister and the relationship was untenable. Now, the outgoing commissioner says that he was not fired and will do a handover report, unlike previous commissioners. Sitole has also accused former IPID boss Robert Mcbride of conspiring to get him fired as police commissioner. Here's that sit down with Samkele Maseko.
Police commissioners in South Africa seemingly don't finish their term. The late Jackie Celebi was unceremoniously removed from his position after allegations of corruption and a court verdict against him. Ria Piecha as well did not finish her term of office after the Marikana massacre. Fast forward to Khomotso Phahlane, allegations of corruption once again dogged the police commissioner's office. He and she did not finish their term of office. You go to Bheki Cele as well, the current Minister of Police. They didn't finish their term of office as well. Yet again, Khehla Sitole, the current police commissioner, 7 months towards the end of his term, has reached an agreement with President Cyril Ramaphosa, which is good in line for the democracy of this country, in the words of the presidency, for the termination of his contract. But it all didn't begin there. One interesting story is how Khehla Sitole became the police commissioner. Police Commissioner Khehla Sitole, thank you very much for granting us this interview.
Thank you very much.
First and foremost, how did you become the police commissioner?
It might just be important to link the beginning to the climax end and say just on the very first day I entered the door of policing, I already demonstrated or displayed the ability of becoming a national commissioner in future, because I moved from the #1 student in the college, becoming the best student of the course nationally, and I went through a high flyer program right up to the level where I became a national commissioner. But important to explain is the fact that I never applied for a post or for promotion in the police. I went through anointment processes, and the same post of national commissioner, I did not apply for it. They called for CVs. People sent their CVs. They were called for interviews. The interviews proceeded. The panel still could not find the right candidate. I was then called after the interviews were conducted to bring my CV, so that they also wanted to see if I have the potential. And through then the power of anointment, I went there and I convinced the panel. I displayed my capacity, my experience, and the wisdom I have about policing. And that's how I then became a national commissioner, but I didn't apply for the post.
Your relationship with former President Jacob Zuma was also characterized with allegations of corruption, particularly heading towards that watershed 2017 conference of the ANC. At the time, the police ministry, you were at the helm. Allegedly, you purchased a grabber because there were allegations that the former president's life was at stake, at risk. The former deputy president, now the president, Cyril Ramaphosa, and several other ministers. Did you purchase this 45 million rands gadget?
No. I think it's important to start with a no. The grabber was not procured. And secondly, I was never involved in the procurement or any process that was intended to purchase a grabber. It was information that was brought in the form of propaganda. What I can confirm is that yes, there was a national security threat that was brought to my attention. which flowed from the ministry and communicated to me. And for that, I had an obligation to make sure that the threat, the so-called national security threat, is neutralized. There's a response that is being given. I then called both the Deputy of Crime Investigations and as well as the Deputy for Support. I gave them the assignment to make sure that they undertake an exercise which will help us to provide a response to the threat so that it gets neutralized. I never told them to purchase a grabber. I never gave a specific directive to them that they should be the procurement of a grabber. But anyway, they followed a process on their own where they actually met with service providers. Amongst those service providers, there's the one service provider who was prepared to provide a gadget that could respond. And while that process was on, I then received a letter from IPID that they were investigating the supplier they were engaging with. And immediately after that, I ordered them to stop the process. And we opted for a different way of responding to the threat.
Who was the supplier? Who called you from IPID? And what informed you in stopping the purchasing of the specific grabber?
Okay, the supplier was iView, and the iView was not necessarily a new supplier. It was a supplier that had already done some work with the CI before. And it is actually from the previous work that iView was doing with CI that triggered the investigations which IPID was undertaking and which were then brought to my attention, and I was not aware of those. And so, in view of the fact that there was those investigations emanating from other contracts where the supplier was involved, and that being brought to my attention while they were engaging with the supplier, I then said, no, as a result of the investigations and what IPID has told us about, they have stopped the process. And that's where I then took that decision.
Then where do the allegations stem from that you purchased that grabber in order to assist former President Jacob Zuma and his perceived camp in the ANC to win that 2017 Watershed Conference?
There was a former IPID investigator who was involved in the beginning process of the investigation. The very same former IPID investigator wrote a report, and he explained the reason why this particular investigation was initiated. And it's clearly outlined that seemingly it emanated from the contest of the position of National Commissioner. No one expected me to become the National Commissioner. Everyone had expectations. And I came out as a dark horse, and people started asking questions. Now, according to the former IPID investigator, he says he was called in a report, and it's in black and white, and also in an affidavit. Says he was called, and in that meeting, they said, where does this Sitole come from? What is it that we can do in order to make sure that we remove him from the position? We managed to deal with Patlane. Patlane was out, and now is Sitole. Then came the formulation of this information around the purchase of the grabber and the politics coming into play. It's not me who's saying it, it's in that report. And that report was also escalated to Parliament by the same former IPID investigator. and as well as to the ministry. Then later on, the IG also came out to the commission of inquiry, and he clearly outlined his report in which he vindicated me, and it was a clear indication that I never got involved in purchasing any grabber. And he also then further indicated that this grabber story was first brought to his attention. He was approached. He actually rejected the process, but he then indicated further that after all, I then took a decision, that is according to his report, to stop the procurement of that grabber. So that information, according to those reports, it was just false information. I don't know what was it intended for, but it stemmed from the contest of becoming a national commissioner.
Police Commissioner, are you alleging that the IPID investigator at the time was the head of this investigation? It was Robert Mcbride. Are you alleging that Robert Mcbride had a sinister motive in getting you booted out of the position of Police Commissioner?
That's what the report says. It's clearly so said in that report, because Mr. Robert Mcbride is the one who called the former investigator, and he was heading that particular discussion. That's what that report outlines.
What motive would he have had?
Well, seemingly he was amongst those who were lined up to become national commissioner. I'm not sure, but I think I wouldn't understand deeply the motive, but I know that I came very unexpected to become the national commissioner.
You bring in a very important point of the Secret Service account. Was that account active during the July unrest? Were your CIs paid on time to provide intelligence of the rumblings on the ground going towards the July unrest on the arrest of former President Jacob Zuma?
Yeah, look, there's a lot of conflict of understanding surrounding the Secret Service account during July. Firstly, I am not going to disclose much because the Secret Service account, it's not a public domain issue. You deal with it in closed sessions. But what I can indicate for now is that during July, it wasn't sufficiently resourced because the budget was not yet allocated.
So in essence, the minister and the president at the time did not sign off on the crime intelligence budget during the July unrest?
I can say that it was not yet signed off at that time, by that time.
That's huge. But how's your relationship with the Minister of Police?
My relationship with the Minister of Police, I can start by saying is professionally average, and further indicate that it is governed by prescripts. And as we have been working, the interpretation of the prescripts has always come into play. And remember, the prescripts would clearly outline the separation of powers and also indicate whose mandate and whose role that relates to a particular situation.
Police Commissioner, I'll put it to you that there's a breakdown, and has been for a while, of relations between you and the minister. One, the minister said you were a wall during the July unrest, nowhere to be found. He was working with the deputies. You, somewhere relaxing, nowhere to be found. Two, your contract has been cut short now by 7 months. That shows that the minister has no confidence in your leadership as Commissioner of Police.
Okay. All right, firstly, let's start with the one of me nowhere to be found. Very interesting. Just recently, I've been to Parliament. He also went public and say, I was not in Parliament, so nowhere to be found. Now, the question is, how does that reconcile with the past? And how much is that past believable that I was nowhere to be found? Yet, you could not see that I'm in Parliament, and you went public and say I'm not. And I was there in blue uniform. So, but then at the same time, I want to refer to the most recent, where I've been portrayed as a, what do we call it, a treason criminal, conniving with EFF and all that. I think I had to clarify that thing to say, hey, I think the meeting was initiated by the minister's office. But then it's me now who's committing treason. I think this particular aspect was also clarified. And we appeared before the media, both of us with the minister, in which this matter was actually reconciled. So, and the minister then said in that media conference that me and him, we never fought. He also confirmed that me and him have got a good working relations. Challenges are in any family. So, this is a confirmation that in my view, there's no facts that one can use to confirm a breakdown of relationship. So, and he also even accepted the fact that, no, that thing about me conniving with EFF was also not correct. It got clarified.
It may not be all over for Khehla Sitole, as there is still a vacancy of a national security advisor after Charles Ngakula left.